Hey, this is a project I'm really excited about. It's a piano roll, like the piano rolls in any digital audio workstation, but this one lets you compose in any tuning system without any limitation, or at least as far as I can tell. I wanted to make this video later this year, but I was somehow afraid because the idea is so obvious and basic that I felt eventually a big company would come out with this piano roll as a feature, and all my work would end up being just to have a bad copy of something that like already exists. Yeah, so I suddenly felt that urge to show this project out, and it's still a work in progress. There's a lot of to do, but I found that it's also already very fun to use. So I thought it was worth sharing already. The piano roll in any digital audio workstation or the piano keyboard on most synthesizers is not really adequate to compose music in any other tuning system than the 12 tones equal temperament, because intervals that are different get represented by equally spaced places in a grid, and that there's really no visual cue whatsoever when you have this equally spaced grid mapped to differently sized intervals. And that throws intuition out of the window, really. And since intuition is such an important thing when you're composing music, I thought that it was rather impossible to compose music freely with Scala files or with any other kind of mapping of notes to an arbitrary tuning system. The other big problem is that when you're using a Scala file or you're using any of these mappings, you're limited to a fixed set of notes. And sometimes you want, for example, the harmony to drift away. That's the problem that led to our equal tone temperament. If you want to use just intonation, then you're gonna end up with a harmony that drifts over with time. That's something that people who study tuning systems sort of understand by heart. But I also don't want to make this project about getting really deep into theory. For me, the most important thing is to connect composition with intuition. Yeah, so I could not in any way come into terms with composing music with 12 tones keyboards or piano rolls. I took inspiration in graphic design tools, and I wanted to be able to represent the notes as graphical elements that could be placed in any place in the 2D space. This 2D space being comprised of vertically the tone and horizontally the time. This piano roll works virtually like any other piano roll because the vertical axis is tone in a logarithmic scale, and in the horizontal axis we have time in a linear scale. The only difference is that this piano roll doesn't limit you to a 12 tones grid. You can put the notes in any continuous place between one tone and the other. But then in order to create order in your composition, you also need some sort of limitation. That's where the graphic design tools came as a great inspiration, because you can activate these constraints that limit the places where you can put notes according to different mathematical relationships. And yes, of course, the 12 tones equal temperament is one of the possibilities among all these different constraints. So this is the piano roll user interface. You can create notes simply by clicking. And if you want a note to have an endpoint, you click and drag. And while you drag, it's gonna extend the note. These dots are very different than the rectangles because the dots only have a start point, while the rectangles have a start and end point. After you create a few notes, you can select them by clicking. And also by pressing Ctrl, you can add notes to the selection. If you are pressing Ctrl and click outside any note, you're gonna create an area selection. So all the notes that fall inside the rectangle get selected. And of course, you can also deselect notes by pressing Ctrl and clicking on the different events. When you select a group of notes, you can copy them around by pressing Alt key. With Alt and drag, you're gonna copy the whole group. At the bottom left, there's the transport with the BPM selection. I'm not very sure that the BPM is accurate yet, but it still changes the speed of playback. So you press play and the transport is gonna start advancing and playing the notes in your composition. You can also click on the top bar here, and that's gonna jump to different points in the song. When you stop the playback, it's gonna come back to the last place you clicked here. You can also jump while it's playing. On the right of the interface, there are these different drawers, and I'm gonna go through each one of these. The first drawer is about projects. So when you close the window and open it again, it's gonna remember the last thing you did. But also you can save different files with different names. If you type in the name and press save, it's gonna create a new entry. When you click on the buttons containing the different entry names, that's gonna activate the different projects. With the projects, you need to be mindful of two things. One is that the unnamed project is saved automatically every few seconds, but the named projects are not saved automatically. That prevents you from saving something you didn't like, how it turns out. But there's the risk you forget pressing save on a named item and lose some of your work. So be mindful of that. The other problem you might run into is that all these projects are stored into your browser and not into a server. That means that if you clear your browsing data, it's also gonna delete your projects. You can export the compositions to JSON format, which is plain text, and it's downloaded to your computer. You can also import this JSON format by opening anything that has been saved by the same system. On the third drawer here on the right, you're gonna find the snap control. And this is the most important bit of this program. Each one of these buttons represent a different constraint that you can enable or disable. When it's enabled, the button looks clearer and it has a black underline. You can see that there are 3 different colors, and that's because there are 3 different types of constraints. The yellow buttons are for constraints pertaining to a grid that's fixed. The orange buttons are for constraints of one node in relation to some other node. And the blue constraints are constraints of time. I'm gonna show you how some of the absolute snaps work. We have the 1 IDO that is octaves only. That lets you only put frequencies that are exponents of one root frequency. The root frequency is not yet configurable, but there are workarounds to that. The 10 IDO is equal temperament of 10 notes. All the notes of 1 IDO are included in the 10 IDO as well. Twelve IDO, also known as 12 TET, is our very known equal temperament. In the same way, we have 19 IDO, 22 IDO, 24, etc. If you hover over each one of the constraint buttons, it's gonna display a little description showing what each constraint does. The relational snaps or relative snaps are one of the more powerful features that this tool has. This one constrains the nodes that can be added only to those nodes that are multiple of already existing nodes. If you create a series of consecutive nodes, what you're gonna get is an overton series. The more nodes you create, the more places you're gonna be able to create a new node. The second constraint allows you only to create nodes that are a simple fraction of one another. Again, the first node is not gonna be constrained, and the second node is gonna only be allowed to be some fraction of the other. Here it's telling me that the second node is 1/2 in frequency than the first one. Here I'm creating a node that is 3.2 times the first one. The more complex the fraction, the more disharmonic it's gonna sound. This constraint is only frequencies that are half or double of another. In other words, octaves. So the first node can be any. The second node can only be an octave below or above the first one. If you press Ctrl and up or down keys, the notes are gonna be shifted an octave up or an octave down. This constraint only allows notes that are 3 times or 1/3 of the other. In combination with octaves, you can make a bit more interesting compositions. The blue constraints are for time, and these are still very simple. The one only lets you add on integer times. So it's only gonna let you add nodes where there's this dotted line. The 1/4 constraint is the same, only that this space is divided in 4. The equal means it only lets you add nodes that start at the same time as some other node. So it's effectively a relational constraint, but in time. The second tab here is for selecting a synthesizer. There's not a lot to control here because this is more a composition tool than a digital audio workstation, and it's never gonna be possible to make advanced audio processing in this because it's a browser technology. But I bundled a few samples. We are listening now to the piano sample that is not available online yet, but I'm gonna make available as a download. If you press this right arrow, it's gonna switch to different synthesizers or samplers. Hey, thank you for checking this video. I'm really excited to show this to you, and I would really appreciate it if you pledged to the algorithm in my favor by clicking subscribe and like and all that stuff. I also have a Patreon, which is a platform where people can help creators. If you like the project I do and you don't have difficulties doing so, I would also appreciate a lot, and all this positive feedback is a huge motivator for me to keep on going and making these weird experiments.